Right. Welcome all to this Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 2 meeting, which, due to government advice to the public to practice social distancing, will be held virtually with committee members and officers accessing the meeting from remote locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Please can everyone ensure that all mobile phones are switched off or onto silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda on Monday the 17th of January 2022. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point, but I would ask that, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. If any members wish to speak to raise a point or question, they should please click on the raise hand button at the top of the Teams window and I will come to you in turn. Please do not use the instant messaging chat to enter questions or comments. We can now move on to item number 1 of the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Meryl, are you able to announce the apologies received?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Pam Davis, Councillor Martin Jones, Councillor Anil Pachella, Councillor Gary Thomas, Councillor Ken Watts, and also the Deputy Leader, Councillor Howell Williams, and Kelly Watson, Chief Officer, Legal and Regulatory Services, HR and Corporate Policy. Thank you.
Great, thanks. We've got 2 new members on the committee as well, but I'm not sure if they've been able to attend because they received their papers late. I think they were agreed in council this week that they would be joining this committee. If we can go on to item number 2 then, declarations of interest. If any member has an interest to declare in any matter on the agenda, please click on the raise hand button and I will come to you in turn for you to declare your interest. Bear with me. Councillor Sorrell Dendy, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in one of the items. It comes under budget pressures as I'm in receipt of direct care payments. It's a personal interest.
Yeah, because that's for adult
social services.
Yes, great. Okay, thanks very much. Has anyone else got any interest to declare? No. Okay, we'll go on to item number 3 of the agenda, the Corporate Parenting Champion Nomination Report. Meryl, are you able to present this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the report begins on page 3 of the agenda pack in front of...
Can I just stop you a second? I think Claire Marchant's got her hand up.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Can I declare a personal non-prejudicial interest as close family members are in receipt of domiciliary care, and that's covered off in the budget report around adult services. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Sorry, Meryl, you can continue now.
Thank you, Chair. So the report starts on page 3 of the agenda pack. The committee is requested to nominate 1 member as its corporate parenting champion to represent the committee as an invitee at meetings of the Cabinet Committee Corporate Parenting. The role of the corporate parenting champion is to represent their Overview and Scrutiny Committee in discussions regarding items relating to children in care and care leavers. To avoid duplication of members nominated from other committees, I can advise that the other members currently sitting on Cabinet Committee Corporate Parenting are Councillor Tim Thomas from Corporate Committee, Councillor Kay Rowlands from Committee 1, Councillor James Radcliffe from Committee 3, and yourself, Chair, as a separate arrangement because you're the Chair for Scrutiny for Social Services. So I'll hand back to you for committee's nomination.
Okay, I think in the pre-meeting, Councillor David White put his name forward. Have we got any other nominations? Or is everyone content for Councillor White to do this? No?
Can we remove her in a second, please?
Yeah, okay.
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, well, I've moved it.
Oh, so I was going to say I move this, but there we
Okay,
are.
great, thank you. Thanks. Okay then, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thanks. We'll go on to item number 4 then, which is the medium-term financial strategy 2022 to 23 to 2025 to 26 and the corporate parenting nomination. No, I think we've done that. I will ask the Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change to present the report, please. Caris, could you present the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. For the sake of the recording, I'm Caris Lord and I'm the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. As the Chair has just said, this item regards the medium-term financial strategy for the period 22-23 to 25-26. And it sets out the spending priorities for the Council and the budget areas going forward. It includes a financial forecast for the period 2022 to 2026 and a detailed draft revenue budget for the coming financial year 22-23. Members receive regular quarterly revenue monitoring updates, the latest of which was considered by Cabinet earlier this week. And that agenda item outlined the current budget pressures for services within this year's budget. And they include issues such as legislative change, demographic changes, and particularly for this committee chair, the increasing level of support and complexity of support that people in the community are now requiring. Members will be aware that during the current financial year, additional resources have been received from Welsh Government to meet these additional costs and any lost income which has resulted directly as a result of the pandemic. So if I may, Chair, in section 4 of the report, we move on to the financial overview for the Council. And as in previous years, the report outlines some of the key actions that the Council is working on in relation to managing the budget going forward in order to be able to continue to support education and early intervention, but also social services and wellbeing services as we go forward. So that those key tenets of the budget strategy remain in place. And just very briefly, Chair, the Council will seek to raise additional income where it can. However, it is acknowledged that those opportunities are limited at the current time due to the immense challenges that COVID-19 has brought to the residents of the borough. The Council will continue to seek alternative ways of delivering services if that can ensure greater sustainability and efficiency. After decades of substantial budget savings, the opportunity for large-scale reductions of this sort are now very difficult to achieve, but they do remain an important component of the medium-term financial strategy. The Council will continue to review all of its portfolio of building assets to look at either future income generation or rationalisation. And changes to service provision will continue to be done by services to ensure that we provide and prioritise those services that are deemed most important in terms of meeting the Council's agreed objectives. So in section 4, we go into more detail, Chair, with regards to particular issues for each service area in the Council. And of particular relevance for this committee would be the social care and wellbeing budget. Within the draft budget contained in this report this morning, the Council is proposing to spend £78 million on social care and wellbeing services in the coming financial year. The strategy has been to transform how we work with people, and the service has been introducing new ways of working, which are sustainable in the longer term. And the budget proposals within this draft budget do build on the implementation plans that are already in place. If I may, just the financial context that we're working in as we move forward. The draft settlement for local authorities for the coming financial year was received on the 21st of December 2021, and work has been undertaken since that time to determine the impact of that on our budgets as we go forward. What the draft settlement does include is a detailed allocation for the coming financial year and then some planned allocations for 23-24 and 24-25. I would state that the allocations for the later years are only given to us at an all Wales basis and they are not broken down by local authority at the current stage. So the headline figure for the coming financial year was an overall increase of 9.4% for local authority funding across Wales, and for Bridgend, this increase was a 9.2% increase in our funding. I must stress that within that additional funding, we're required to meet the additional costs of the teachers' pay deal for the current financial year and next year. We need to fund the increased national insurance contributions which all services are having to make. We also have to fund the additional costs of introducing the real living wage for care workers. And I'd stress that whilst this is in the budget, the detail of how this will be determined is yet to be received from Welsh Government. What we've also had at this stage is information on specific grants on an all Wales basis, but as yet we've not had the detail at an authority level for all of the grants that we'll receive for next year. It is important to note, Chair, that there will be no hardship grant for the coming financial year. As members will be aware, we've been claiming for additional costs and lost income as a result of the pandemic for the last 2 years. It's now expected within that settlement that we've had for the coming financial year that local authorities will have to meet any ongoing pandemic pressures within their existing budgets. So what the report outlines for you is the medium-term financial strategy for the period up to 25-26. And it looks at the next 4 financial years, and the information in the document has been reviewed in light of the additional information that we've now had regarding the settlement. It also does some financial modelling with regards to the best, worst and most likely scenario for resources as we go forward. The draft revenue budget contained within this strategy assumes a 0% increase in council tax for the coming financial year. And this has been possible due to the better than anticipated provisional settlement and also in response to the issues raised through the budget consultation process. However, going forward, the scale of the financial challenge remains considerable, so there is an assumed annual increase in the council tax for the following 2 financial years. This strategy, Chair, is updated on a regular basis, and obviously these figures will be updated and reviewed during the coming financial year. So at paragraph 4.11.4, the potential budget for the year is summarised. The position for the next 4 years is summarised. And based on the scenario planning that's been done, total savings are estimated at £21 million for that period. To date, savings of £4 million have been identified. And however, meeting the addition will be challenging. But as I've already said, Chair, these will be reviewed as we move through the period and the MTFS is updated. What is also in this report is the more detailed revenue budget for the coming financial year. And that's shown at table 6 of your report this morning. The budget has included cost pressures of 11.86 million for the coming financial year, and those are detailed in Appendix A to this report. Some of the most significant pressures within those pressures include for a range of services, but in particular in relation to this committee, it's around increased pressures on adult social care, increased costs in relation to the supported living service, and also the impact of the increase of the real living wage for social care workers. There are also budget reductions proposed for the budget next year of £631,000. These have been identified and are detailed at Appendix B to this report. As a result of the better than anticipated settlement, we have been able to reduce some of the savings for the coming financial year. So if I may, Chair, I'd just like to take you to the recommendations, which is that we're asking committee to consider the information contained in the report and in the attached appendices, and also to determine whether to make any comments or recommendations for consolidation and inclusion in the report to Cabinet on the draft MTFS, including proposed budget pressures and budget reduction proposals within the remit of this Scrutiny Committee as part of the budget consultation process. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. What we were looking to do was go through each item of Appendix A and Appendix B with you. Before we do that, there are a couple of people who weren't present in the pre-meeting. Has anyone got any general questions on the general report first before we move on? Let's see if there's any hands coming up. There's none. I've just got the one question on the report. I don't know whether it's yourself or Claire who would be best to answer this, but when you said about the hardship fund is being removed, has the Directorate relied upon the hardship fund, and do we have any idea of how much they've been able to claim in the past as a result of the hardship fund? Claire, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'm Claire Marchant, Corporate Director of Social Services and Wellbeing. In common with all parts of the Council, there have been significant claims against the Hardship Fund made from Social Services and Wellbeing. I draw particular attention to the leisure and cultural contracts, but particularly the leisure arrangements that we have with Halo, where in 2021 over £1 million was claimed via the Hardship Fund, and over 700,000 to date through the first 2 quarters of this financial year. And obviously that relates to the significant impact on leisure sector that there has been through the pandemic, with the restrictions that have been in place, and it's sometimes not been able to operate at all at other times, including at the moment operating with restricted capacity due to the level of restrictions that are in place. In addition to that, there have been claims made for the social services part of the Directorate linked into increased pressures, having to manage services very differently, personal protective equipment which is enhanced. I don't have the exact figures to hand in terms of the social services elements from the hardship fund, but colleagues from finance may, or we may be able to provide you with that information after the meeting.
Okay, thanks very much. I was just interested to know how this is going to affect the Directorate with it being taken away, whether you see how much you think you might have to then find, which you had been receiving via the hardship fund.
I think in that regard, that the pressures certainly from social services have been formulated in a way to enable us to move into a balanced budget position next year, taking into account the increased need and demand for services that have come through from the pandemic, and I know we'll go through those pressures line by line in a moment. In terms of the leisure and cultural sectors, representation is still being made through to Welsh Government in terms of the impact of those sectors, and still quite detailed planning and modelling being undertaken about the return to participation and membership, which is obviously what drives the costs and the budget basis in leisure particularly. We've seen participation at various points return to close to 80% as restrictions have been lifted, and plans are in place to look at what that modelling in terms of participation looks like going forward. So that's still some work in terms of the detail which is progressing, Chair.
Thanks very much. I don't know if you wanted to come in, Caris, because I could see your hand came up briefly on my screen.
Yes, Chair. It was very briefly just to say I agree with the figures that Claire has just given you in relation to Halo. In relation to social care, I can notify committee that the total claim with regards to expenditure for social care to the end of December from the hardship fund was 3.8 million.
Okay, thanks very much. Has anyone else got any questions on the general report? No. Oh, yes, Councillor David White. Councillor White?
Sorry, my mic goes off. In regard to the hardship fund, could that be subject to change if the pandemic, we went into another sort of like period as we are now? Or is that just Welsh Government said to us in the next budget year, you've got to live off the grant that we've been given? Or would that be subject to change?
Okay, thanks. Mark Shepherd, do you want to come in and answer that?
Yeah, just to give you the benefit of some of the discussions I've had. I mean, I think as things stand, unless there's a further variant or a further spike that would change the COVID situation, the Welsh Government have been fairly clear that the settlement is meant to cover the things previously covered by the hardship fund. But they have as you'd expect, they have left that open to review in circumstances that were severe enough that we may again all have to rely on central government support for whatever may come. But I think the assumption is that we will get to a stage, hopefully by the start of the new financial year, where COVID is less severe, and moving forward, therefore they don't anticipate having to lock down again or all of the things that previously required that support. But I think it's a case of saying never say never, because I don't think any of us know, do we, what lies ahead, for example, next winter. But I think we have to make the assumption from a budget point of view that we have to cover all of those costs that were previously covered from that hardship fund.
Okay, thanks very much. You happy with that, Councillor White?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Great. Okay, if we've got no further questions, then if we move on to Appendix A, and that's the budget pressures, they're pages 43 and 44. If we take them in order, and we'll go to SSW1, which is helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient, and it's the increase to connected persons fostering fees stemming from a national eligibility criteria in Wales. We have got some questions on this, but before we go into that, could you please just give us a brief explanation on the pressure?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this pressure is quite straightforward, really. Connected persons are individuals who have a family or friends connection to a child or young person, who then become the carer for that young person, take on parental responsibility for them. They are paid fees and allowances, as are other foster carers. There's been a national review of those fees and allowances, and there's a resulting budget pressure which is set out within the report as a consequence of that national review.
Great, thank you very much. And I think Councillor David White had a question then on this.
Cheers, Chair. In regard to those kind of pressures, in fostering care, as we all know, you can have a family member, you can have a child taken into care at very short notice, and usually there's maybe 2 or 3 siblings involved, and sometimes, with extra, going into extra sort of specialist care, which can cost thousands and thousands of pounds per week. So I was asking, my question really is, how do you prepare for those kind of budget pressures, knowing that we all have to live within a budget, but we also have a duty of care to the young people in our communities and to make sure they have the best service. So how do you prepare for those sudden changes in budgets?
Thanks very much for the question, Councillor White. I think, in the narrative within the report, it talks about social services being very much a needs-led service. I'd like to use the word needs rather than demand-led, because demand implies that there's some form of choice. Needs are something which we have an absolute statutory duty to meet, and to meet in a way which is going to deliver the best outcomes and quality of life for the person. And obviously in children's services, that will frequently be an arrangement such as a connected person foster care arrangement. It might be our in-house fostering, it might be an independent fostering, and in some cases the best way to meet a child and young person's needs would be a residential placement for a period of time. We plan for those occurrences the best that we can by looking at the evidence and data that we have. So we have evidence and data in terms of demographics, the number of children and young people living in the county borough. We look at the proportion of those children and young people in the county borough who we would predict, and it's very much based on predictions around numbers of 10,000 per population who we would expect at any point in time to be care experienced. We would then, from a budget planning point of view, look at within that mix of care experienced children, how many we would anticipate are living on a care order with their own parents, or in those different types of regulated provision that I just set out there. Each one of those regulated provisions would have a unit cost associated with them, and then using all of that data and information, we're able to put together a budget which is based on the very best set of assumptions, but it's always assumptions knowing that these budgets, as I say, are needs led, and when you have a situation in terms of children and families, your first and foremost priority is to meet those needs in the most cost-effective way, but to meet those needs in the way that meets the needs of the child and young person. But there is a great deal of planning which goes into effect in terms of setting those budgets.
Thanks very much. Are you happy with that, Councillor White?
Thank you, Claire. As always, a very in-depth answer. Thank you.
Has anyone else got any questions on SSW1? We didn't have any more in our pre-meet, but I'm conscious not everyone was there at that meeting. I don't think so. We'll move on to SSW2, and that is the increased pressure on mental health services due to the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting lockdowns. And I think us as a committee and all us members know that there have been substantial pressures, but I wondered if you could just give some examples just for the public's knowledge so that they're aware of some of the pressures we've encountered.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. As you say, I think that councillors are very aware and have highlighted to us as officers on numerous occasions concerns around the impact of prolonged lockdowns on emotional health and well-being. As a council, I'm very much working in partnership with our partners in Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board. We've worked to develop a range of services from the very preventative first line mental health services and right the way through up into acute services. We've got our ARC service, which is a service which is open across 7 days a week, where we're seeing increased numbers of people coming in and requiring that sort of first line preventative support to prevent their needs escalating up to further levels, and at various points during the pandemic and planning into next year, we're anticipating that service will continue to need further investment. We've got our social care assessment and resource team, the SCART team, as you will hear it called, where again we're seeing increased need and demand from a social care perspective for mental health services. Actually, then, as we move up through into more acute services, and we work very much, as I say, in partnership with the Health Board around these services, we've not seen quite the same increase in need and demand for Mental Health Act assessments and people coming through into secondary care services, and that probably is as a consequence of the fact that we've very much focused on investment in these frontline preventative services, very targeted preventative services for adult mental health and well-being, and we will continue to develop and progress that approach. There's actually quite a detailed paper coming to the next Scrutiny Committee, I think on the 2nd of February, where we'll have some more detail around that particular area of service, Chair.
Thanks very much. I can see Councillor Gebbie wants to come in as well on this.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just put my hand down before I forget. I think it's also worth noting the amount of work we've done with third sector. I mean, without our reliance on our volunteers throughout the pandemic, we would have seen significant numbers coming into first and secondary mental health provision. So I think we really need to thank our partner agencies and all those volunteers who have worked excessively, I want to say, throughout the pandemic to make sure that people are sorted out. And part of it is about the community navigators and the community companions. You know, when I consider that we're talking about helping people and communities be more healthy and resilient, the more we can deal with things before they come into, I want to say, more statutory services. If we can deal with things before they get to that pressure, we're in a much better position. So we have to give thanks to our volunteers, particularly at this time. Thank you very much, Chair.
Great, thanks very much for that. I know Councillor White then had a question on this with regards to staff pressures.
Just to echo what the Cabinet Member Jane Gebbie just said, as somebody who was a shielder, I benefited from those volunteers, and probably more at the lower end than some other members of the committee. And you know, I couldn't thank them enough. You know, they did a risk assessment on me, what I needed at the start. I had the call, and you know, and the service and the volunteers have been tremendous. You know, and they really got us through through the pandemic, and without them, we would have really struggled even more. So I echo what Jane Gibb, the cabinet member, Councillor Gebby's just said. They've been fantastic. And I hope some of those people who went to started volunteering actually continue to volunteer. I haven't had a taste of what it was like to volunteer. In regard to my question on SW2, what would be the pressure on the pandemic in regard to staffing levels? You know, as we know, we've had a lot of staff on how do I self-isolate and going forward. You know, where do we think we're going to be looking at staffing levels now? How do you get around that and still have and maintain a very good service?
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor White. And just to emphasise, I think the point that the cabinet member made and yourself there in terms of our working with the third sector, work very incredibly closely with the third sector in terms of that support to individuals to keep them as connected and to address the issues arising from isolation throughout the pandemic, and that's been absolutely critical in terms of not seeing yet more demand on statutory services, and it will continue to be critical as we move forward. We also work in the mental health services very closely with Mental Health Matters, who I know a number of members will know, and they're a key part of our service offer, and we commission them jointly with the Health Board. In terms of the impact on workforce, we have seen at various points in time through the pandemic workforce absences which have been related to the direct effects of having COVID or having to self-isolate through COVID. We've seen that just latterly now with this latest Omicron variant, and at points we've been up as high as 16% of workforce who are not in work in social services and wellbeing for various reasons, but that COVID related absence obviously increasing at various points, and hopefully now starting to reduce as we're seeing, you know, quite significant reductions in the virus within our communities. We're obviously very, very cognizant, and I know we spent a lot of time in Scrutiny talking about the psychological impact of the prolonged pandemic and the nature of the work that individuals have been doing on our workforce, and always very concerned about any stress related ill health which we see within those sickness figures, and doing a lot at the moment working with colleagues in HR and corporately and within the directorate around those elements to keep people in work and to support them as they come through the impact of the pandemic through our Care First offer, through access, very ready access to counselling and support for individuals. Some of that focused on teams, and a lot of our social care recovery investment that we've had this year has been focused on team recovery and team development and acknowledgement of what they've worked through in the pandemic. And we're also looking now going into next year to implement a way of working called TRIM, which is a trauma-informed immediate response, which the Ambulance Trust and South Wales Police have implemented, and other police forces throughout the UK, which provides a very immediate response to individuals if there is a traumatic event which they encounter as part of their work, and that's been very successful in other partner organisations about keeping individuals in work when things they come across as part of their work are of that traumatic nature.
Great, thanks. Councillor White, you happy with that? Anything else you wanted to ask?
No, thank you, Claire.
Great. Has anyone got any other questions on SSW2? Otherwise, we'll move on to SSW3, which is the implications of the national living wage uplifts. When we looked at this, we could see it's obvious the pressures that the directorates will have, but I think Councillor White again had another question with regards to this. You want to come in?
Just to say, it's my last question. Can you confirm, as we know, the wage increase hasn't been settled yet? You know, this year's wage increase, which is currently stands, I think, at 1.75% has been offered. Can you confirm, will we have to meet that wage increase, or is that met pound for pound by the UK government?
Councillor Gebby, answer that.
Thank you very much. If I could answer Councillor White. The reality is you're talking about the NJC pay offer, which is a UK-wide government. our social care in relation to the national living wage. Yes, it's come from UK government, but Welsh government are quite clear. I think it's by 2023 we have to be paying at least £10.50 per hour. We have written it into all commission contracts, and our own staff are already paid that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor White, you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Cabinet. Thank you, Councillor Gebby.
Right. Has anyone else got any questions on the national living wage uplift? So, Councillor Hugh David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies. I've had some technical difficulties, so I've missed parts of the meeting. So, if you have called me and there was deathly silence, then it's because I was.
No, I don't think anyone's had a question for you yet.
Oh,
You're
right.
okay.
So, okay. Oh, that's good.
We've kept them all for now. So
kept them all for now. I just wanted to make the point, Chair, that that the real living wage, the commitment to the real living wage, is obviously for all staff in the commission sector, as well as the staff that we directly employ, and of course in social care and adult social care, most of the care is delivered by commissioned partners, so they're not subject to national negotiations and terms of conditions, but they will certainly benefit from the increase in pay. Many of those organisations already pay the real living wage, but not all, and that's why obviously there's going to be an increase in costs. And it's also important to state that we already pay the real living wage to all our staff, have done for a number of years, and certainly to staff in social care for an even longer period than that, Chair. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much. Don't think we've got any other hands up for any more questions on this. So if we go into SSW4, which is helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient, and it's the increase in the older person's population and corresponding increase in pressure on services. I don't think we had any questions in our pre-meeting on this, because we agreed that people are living longer now. So obviously there will be an increase in older people. Has anyone got any questions? Or did anyone want to come in on this item? No. Okay, we'll move on to SSW5, and that is the Children's Services workforce pressures, including market supplements to address the 30% vacancy rate in children's safeguarding and care experience team. I think we had a number of questions that came up on here. I think Councillor White did raise a question here, but I think I can cover it off. It's with regards to how successful in-house training is and the cost of agency staff as well to the Directorate.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I think in terms of in-house training, I would highlight, and it was before I started, so I take no credit, that our social care workforce development team is actually an award-winning team. They won a social care accolade a couple of years ago for their first year in practice programme. So I think we're very committed, knowing and understanding the absolute pressures there are around social work recruitment, particularly children's social work recruitment, to growing our own social workers, and we've got 8 colleagues this year seconded onto the social work course. Obviously there's a significant lead in time between going onto the course and then going forward and becoming a social worker, and particularly the post-qualification consolidation phase. So that's really important to highlight that success of our in-house training programme for those who are in their first year in practice. And we obviously work very closely with universities and further education establishments around the social work course host a number of students, and particularly with Cardiff Met and Bridgend College in that regard. You know, the training programme across all social care services, I think it is successful through that Scud Up team. There's lots of different offers, you know, right the way through, which I won't detail now, from social care through to social work, post-practice consolidation and training. We are, just from a budgetary perspective, we do get a grant through from Welsh Government called the Scud Up grant, the Social Care Workforce Development Grant, which funds a lot of that training and development for the social care and social work workforce. In terms of agency for social work, it is a very challenging area for ourselves and for all authorities, in that what we're seeing is an increase in agency rates, and it's very much a seller's market in terms of agencies who we rely on for social work posts. When we have vacancies for whatever reason in our teams, particularly children's social work teams, it's not an option to have those posts vacant, so we do fill them with agency, and we are seeing increased rates there. There's been a lot of short-term funding this year, and when there's short-term funding, everybody's clamoring around to bring in agency workers to do specific pieces of work, and that means it's been an even more competitive market just of late. Typically it can be cost at least a third more for an agency worker compared to all that you would pay for a permanent member of staff, even including the on costs associated with permanent staff members.
Okay, and leading on from that, then we were looking at how our recruitment drive is going, if there's an update on how that's going.
So this pressure here is particularly around children's services, isn't it? And yeah, in terms of recruitment at the moment, it is very challenging. We're not getting many applicants coming through for children's social work posts within Bridgend. We are seeing that the appointments that we are able to make will often be internal moves, and that causes real challenge, because we're just moving issues within the service. There are a number of actions that we're taking to address that, some of which are supported by this budget pressure. So we've done a review and restructure within children's social work teams, and we've developed a more experienced social work post, and we've just placed adverts for that in the last week, and that's attracting a higher grade, which means we're more competitive with other social work, children's social work posts across South Wales. We're highlighting the fact that in Bridgend we've got parts of our terms and conditions which other authorities don't have, such as relocation packages, which can support social workers to come from other areas. We've gone out to recruit now for social work assistants from people who are due to qualify this year. So we always have taken on newly qualified social workers as social work assistants prior to their registration coming through, because that takes a couple of months, but usually that's later in the year. What we've done to try and get ahead of the game this year is to go out very early, and we've attracted quite a number of applicants for these roles, for social work assistants, and as soon as people conclude their training, they'll then be employed by us as social work assistants, and then they'll be coming to us as social workers once their registration is through. So trying to bring that forward a number of months, and then a number of these other sort of areas here in terms of the pressure bid here are areas where we're trying to enhance our ability to recruit and to retain workforce. But I wouldn't advise Scrutiny that it is anything other than a very, very challenging market for children's social work at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor White raised an issue. There are other questions from other people as well, as Councillor White. But Councillor White, did you want to come in here about the national wage, and when you discussed your concerns about moving between different local authorities?
Well, I mentioned in our pre-meeting, really, I wasn't really a question, but an observation, really, that as we know, that social workers can change authorities at a drop of a hat. And I worked out one day sitting in Bridgend, if you want to travel 45 minutes into work, and I suppose it's made the job a lot more easier now when in regards to working from home, you can be living anywhere in the UK, you know, and you could like chair meetings anywhere, like you say. So my sort of observation was, in our pre-meeting was, you know, how do we, outside of you know, the money we give staff and the pay, what other incentives really are there to keep staff in Bridgend? Because to me, you know, I know a few social workers, as you would know, and it's not just about the job, it's just about the incentives and who you work with and what's there as an organisation. I don't think, you know, all any social work is there just because of the money. It's a career, it's a smooth, you know, it's a career for them, and they chose to come in to make changes and to help people. But I'm just wondering, you know, and I thought it like spoke about, you know, in a pre-meeting about having you know, a national living wage, a national wage across Wales, you know, so rather than having competing against each other, you know, 'cause at the moment we are competing with the other 22 local authorities in regards to, you know, regards to keeping our staff. So could you know, what's the strength in having a national living wage, a national wage for social workers?
Councillor Hugh David, you put your hand up first. Did you want to come in first?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I certainly support national terms and conditions. Of course, all social workers will be receiving pay well above the national living wage. I do think Councillor White identifies a problem that every local authority in Wales has experienced at one stage or another, and that is that when there's different terms and conditions, particularly around pay for social workers, that there are workers that will move between different local authorities, and I don't think that's good for local authorities. I don't think it's good for the workers, and I certainly don't think it's good for the children. And I think there are increasing numbers of voices at a national level from local authorities that would support that. And I continue to make the case to Welsh Government ministers for national terms and conditions. There are national terms and conditions for other valued professionals, including teachers, police, nurses and doctors. And I don't believe that social workers should be treated differently. I think it is about their status, the importance of their status, and recognising that. And I think it would also be much easier, for example, to run national recruitment campaigns if the terms and conditions are the same across Wales. I also wanted to make the point, and Claire has touched on it, what we've also looked to do through the growth proposals is provide support to social workers to lessen the administrative burden on social workers, so they can focus on the practice, because people go into social work because they want to do direct work with families and children. They don't want to be spending their time arranging review meetings or writing up or transferring notes or undertaking a lot of that administrative work. And a key part of these set of proposals is that we remove that burden so that they can spend more time with children and families. And we believe, Claire, don't we, that, and Councillor Gebbie, that will make a difference in terms of our recruitment and retention. Obviously, we'll want to see these proposals implemented, and then we can see whether that will also make a difference in terms of recruitment and retention. Thanks so much, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Gebbie. Did you want to add to that, please?
I did, yes, thank you, Chair. I think the point, the leaders made a lot of the points that I was going to. However, I would just like to reassure members that we are doing our utmost to ensure that our social work staff are paid appropriately, which is why we've undertaken job evaluation, and we've got further job evaluations being undertaken. And I think what I'd also like to reassure members is this is a national problem. And yes, there are some calls for devolved status for all of our NJC employees across Wales. There's also calls for a job evaluation for the whole of Wales. But that would need a devolved process, so it's a wider issue. And I also think it's worth noting that these conversations are going on not just politically or in service areas, they're actually going on in trade union areas as well. We are saying that we need a job evaluation scheme specifically for Welsh Public Services. And that's at the Workforce Partnership Council. It's also being addressed by the Joint Council for Wales, but just to reassure members.
Thanks very much. Claire, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, only briefly, because the Cabinet Member and Leader have made a number of the points, but it's just to speak to what Councillor White was saying there around why social workers would choose Bridgend and stay in Bridgend as opposed to other authorities. Pay and terms and conditions is absolutely critical, and that speaks to the pressure, but the pressure also covers, as the Leader has said, support officer roles for social workers, so social workers can do social work. And where this type of provision has been implemented in other authorities, it's been incredibly successful in making those authorities very attractive for social workers, and that's something that we hope to achieve through that element of investment if approved. The pressure is also about increasing capacity. As we know, caseloads need to be reasonable and manageable in order to support the quality and level of social work that we want to see within our communities, and that takes the pressure off in terms of work-life balance for our social workers, and the pressure also picks that up. And outside of the pressure, the model of practice that you have, the level of support and quality of supervision, training we've already talked about, development, and dare I say political support that social workers receive are all really, really important in promoting Bridgend as the place that that social workers want to work. It's a profession that doesn't often or always get the sort of positive media coverage that other professions do. So it's a little plea back to members really, as professional responsible for social work within Bridgend, to be really proud and to promote what our social workers do, and that will go a long way in terms of making Bridgend attractive for social workers to come and practice and stay in practice.
Great, thanks very much. Has anyone got any other questions on this item? No. Okay, if we move on to SSW6, that's the increase in take-up of direct payments within children's services. Before I come to questions, I know Councillor Dendy's got questions on this. Could we just have, for the benefit of the public, we had an update on this in our pre-meet, but an overview of what direct payments are within children's services, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So a direct payment is when an assessment of need is undertaken and a care and support plan is developed for an individual child. One way of meeting that care and support plan is a direct payment, which gives increased flexibility and control to the child and the family in terms of how they meet their assessed care needs outcomes. So for a number of children and families, that might be through the employment of a direct payment personal assistant, and members are probably quite familiar with direct payment personal assistants. It could be that the direct payment is used for something else, and you know, we hear examples around things such as driving lessons for carers to enable them to continue to undertake their care and support needs. We hear a lot about short breaks, so that the direct payment is used to fund the short break, so that the carer is able to continue to fulfil their care and support responsibilities. The vast majority is used for direct payments are used for PAs, but we are doing a piece of work at the moment to look at how creative and innovative we can be around direct payments. The vast majority of direct payments at the moment in children's services are sort of as a consequence of care and support assessments in our children with disabilities team, but it is an area that we'd like to look at across more of children's services, to look at where we can use direct payments, again, innovatively and creatively, to keep children and families together.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Dendy, did you want to come in now and ask your question? Just seeing if Councillor Dendy is there. Councillor Dendy, are you able to ask?
Yes, sorry, Chair, sorry.
I know you have problems with your signal up there, so
yeah, I do. It just dipped out for a minute. Is this a SSW6?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's the one you
Right,
declared personal interest on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. With this, it says there's going to be an increase in the take-up of direct payment within children's services. I was just wondering, would there also be a pressure, or is there expected to be a pressure in adult services, as in the other one it says about the fact there will be an increase in the older population, and whether there's going to be more take-up of with older people as well with direct payments. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, Councillor Dendy. And yes, we are seeing and have been increasingly using direct payments in adult services as well. And so that demographic pressure that we see there for older people, and indeed the pressure in mental health services as well, we can use that flexibly dependent on what the care and support plan is. Some of that pressure may go into increased number of direct payments, where that is the best way for the individual to have their care and support needs met. We've been seeing that we've been fast tracking a number of direct payments for individuals linked to the challenges that we've had in commissioned care and support and care workers, which we've talked about a lot within Scrutiny Committee. And in some instances, it's easier to secure a direct payment PA, which might be somebody who is connected to the family, and to use that as a mechanism for meeting somebody's care and support needs. So it's not there as a specific pressure in the same way that pressure is there for children's services, but that demographic pressure would enable us to fund more direct payments for older people.
Did you want to come back on that, Sorrel, Councillor Dendy?
No, I'm all right, thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks. Has anyone got any other questions on this item, SSW6? No, not that I can see. We'll move on then to SSW7. That's the increasing costs of supported living service following re-tender. Before we come into any questions, could you just give us some examples of the reasons behind the increases?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. This relates to a Cabinet report which was brought forward a number of months ago. We brought forward a retender of our supported living services. We've got a very good model in terms of community-based supported living for individuals with learning disabilities, and that tender, and there've been similar tenders across Wales. Actually, where over a number of years we've been seeing an increased cost coming through from providers as a consequence of those retender exercises. So that 650 relates to the outcome of that particular reprocurement, and was anticipated that reprocurement would result in a cost pressure for the council.
Great, thanks very much. When you said about learning disabilities, can I ask a question on those who have been in receipt of disability grants? Because I couldn't see that specifically in these items, about the impact it's having, because there's been some delays, haven't there, with COVID, with getting people's houses up to scratch, and if that is also having a budget pressure on us, and the delays on adapting people's houses as well.
That would be lots of our supported living would be adapted accommodation dependent on the needs of the individual. Some individuals would require those adaptations, and that the homes would be adapted as part of this model of supported living, and others wouldn't. I think that the question then, in terms of the impact on the social services and wellbeing budget of potential delays in adaptations, is something which over the years I've been asked in a number of times in a number of different ways in different authorities. Actually, is there more domiciliary care that we have to commission, for example, if somebody's waiting for an adaptation? And it's really hard to prove cause and effect, because sometimes you could think that if there were a particular walk-in shower, for example, that was fitted in somebody's home, would that reduce the number of domiciliary care calls that would need to be made? Usually not, to be perfectly frank and honest. It would give a better quality of outcome for the individual in terms of the way that they were perhaps supported to have their bathing needs met, but you would still need somebody there from a domiciliary care perspective in order to support that that particular part of a care plan to be undertaken. So there's not a direct causation, I don't think, and I've been part of some quite detailed pieces of work around this over the years, between that particular capital budget and these revenue budgets. Having said that, obviously, in terms of outcomes for individuals, those adaptations really can be very critical and are very critical in terms of improving outcomes and quality of life.
Great, thanks very much. Has anyone got any questions on SSW 7? No. Right, we'll move on then to Appendix B, page 47, and SSW 1 on this. This is across adult and children's services, embed and consolidate outcome-focused practice and commissioning for all services. We've got a few questions on this, but if we could firstly look at if having a brief overview on what this is.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I recall last year there was a lot of discussion around this particular saving within scrutiny committees, and quite a detailed note produced for scrutiny. In a nutshell, strength-based social work practice is around understanding the capabilities and strengths within the lives of individuals with care and support needs, their families and the communities, and working with them from a social work perspective to understand how we can support people to live the very best lives they can by often connecting them to what's happening within their community, to working with them on their own skills and capabilities. And that can, and over the years has, reduced in some reductions in the need to commission care to meet those needs. So to give very practical examples, in the past there would have been more people who went to day services to provide them with meaningful things to do during the day. More people now, instead of going to day services, would be looking at things like supported employment, accessing the community, be it leisure and cultural activities. We've talked a little bit already within committee about the community connectors and local area coordinators who connect people into different opportunities within the places they live, and all of those things which are better for the individual and better for the outcomes that they themselves identify they want to achieve, have ultimately a cost reduction as well, because we need less of those commissioned, more traditional social services. So hopefully that helps to explain what that is.
Great, thanks. And for all three of these budget reduction proposals, they're all red, and I think from your report they're red because of the concerns about whether you can meet these targets. And just if we could, just for the benefit of the committee, just look at that briefly as to the concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And I think it really links to the risks in achieving these proposals, links to the situation in which we find ourselves as a society and communities post-COVID. So there's a couple of things a very high level, which are happening, aren't there? There's increased need and demand as a consequence of the extended period of lockdown. People themselves, because they haven't been going out very much, have seen what's called deconditioning in terms of their physical and mental health, which can cause an increase in need for services. There are some individuals and numbers yet to be fully determined, who will have some ongoing and lingering impact of COVID, having suffered from COVID, long COVID, and for people who are already quite frail, that can mean care needs increase. And linked to those impact in terms of those increasing needs of individuals, society and community is still restricted at the moment, opening back up a little bit, and more from the end of this month. And hopefully we are through the worst in terms of those levels of restrictions. But if those level of restrictions were to come back, we would experience difficulties in what I've just described, that desire from both ourselves and from people themselves to connect in with their own communities. If services aren't operating within communities, then it's difficult to connect to them. And there'll be a piece of work, I think, around the degree of confidence of people who have perhaps shielded or not gone out into their communities for a long period of time, in terms of supporting them through the connectors, to feel confident about reconnecting into communities. So all of that means that these are more risky than in previous years when we hadn't been in a pandemic situation.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Now, we did have some questions from Councillor Dendy, but she's just sent me an apology that she's had to drop out of the meeting for an urgent matter. So if I've got her questions here, so if I could ask those. It was with regards to the maximising the opportunities of the use of technology. And the concern was with regards to the older generation and the computer illiterate, and to ensure they're not forgotten. And she raised a specific concern, being a member that represents the Valley community, that quite often as well, there's no, well, she struggled today herself to get online, and sometimes those some individuals feel isolated. And then on top of that, then it was discussed about the cost of purchasing equipment, and quite often the biggest barrier is the cost of internet access. People paying broadband, and quite often it's not financially viable for somebody to pay for broadband just to access limited services. So her question was about concerning ensuring that there's not going to be a focus on, if we've got to make a saving or a reduction, the focus isn't going to be on technology, and it's going to remember those individuals and also ensure that the support continues for them.
Yeah, thank you very much to Councillor Dendy for the question. I think it's a really important one around digital inclusion, and something that as we move forward with strategies around digitalisation, that from a person-centred point of view, we're always very at pains to ensure that we continue to provide personal services, the opportunity for face-to-face services for people who need them. This particular saving in terms of assistive technology is more around services such as telecare, which you'll be very familiar with in terms of sort of the alarms that are within people's homes, and that technology is really advancing, and we can and do want to use it more as part of care packages. So if you think about the sort of sensors within beds that we can have now, which would give an early indication about whether somebody had been, whose usual pattern of activity would be that they're in bed for perhaps 8 hours at night, and then if they're out of bed, you can program it very specifically around the usual patterns of an individual. If they're out of bed for more than half an hour within the night, that would alert somebody. All of those things are really important in meeting people's usual desires, which it is for the majority of people, to remain living within their own homes. We've seen in the past that for want of those type of provisions and people's need perhaps to be to give assurance that they're safe overnight, that people have perhaps gone into residential care homes. And now with those sorts of assistive technology developments, we can safely keep people in their own home, linked to a human response, which I think is important. So we've got our mobile response teams here in Bridgend who are able to respond if people do need them out of hours, linked to those technologies. But we see that we're probably only quite a small way in exploiting the potential of technology within social care as part of care packages which support people to remain as independent as possible within their own home. And that's where that saving is, rather than around the digital delivery of services.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. Has anyone else got any questions? Oh, Councillor Hugh David wants to come in first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the question, because I think it's a good question that's been asked by other colleagues over the years about digital inclusion and digital connectivity, particularly in some of our rural communities. We are considering a number of proposals as Cardiff Capital Region City Deal, proposals that are coming forward around boosting connectivity to residents and businesses across the region, because it is a problem that is experienced across South East Wales, and clearly there's advantage in working on scale, in responding to those challenges, because a lot of the large infrastructure companies will only deliver major enhancements on a regional scale, and we've got that critical mass as a region, and we are actually considering a range of proposals currently about how we can improve connectivity for all our residents across South East Wales. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Janice Lewis, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's concerning do we see a decrease in the use of day services? Are we going to see that?
Thanks very much. I don't know Claire's going to answer this for you.
Yeah, I think that this links into SSW2 and 3 around remodelling day services and remodelling supported living. I think what we're seeing around our day opportunities, and some of this has been a little bit accelerated by the pandemic, is that there are people who perhaps would traditionally have gone to day services who now have quite enjoyed actually not going and having their care and support needs met in another way within their own communities during the pandemic. And some people are saying to us that they don't want to return. But at the other end of the spectrum, we're developing more specialist day service provision. So just in the last year, we've had a specialist dementia service which has developed, and integrated service with the Health Board, which is now operating out of Bridgend Resource Centre. And I would see and anticipate that type of service will actually be more in the future. And we're very, very fortunate here in Bridgend, and I've seen nothing like it anywhere else in Wales, to have facilities such as Bridgend Resource Centre, which are of quite the scale and level and standard of provision to be able to meet those more specialist needs. So I think we will see things happening at 2 different levels. people whose needs can be met within community and are increasingly saying we'd like that. We need to do some more work around supported employment. We've got Woodby and Beleaf provided in partnership with Arwen, and lots of people with disabilities say they would like to work, but only small proportions of people do work. So there's more work that we can do in that area for people to be able to live the lives they want to live. But at that more specialist end, as we're having more people remaining living at home for longer, but with quite complex need and advanced dementia, for example, I think we will need more of that more specialist provision.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Lewis, you happy with that response?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm very happy about inclusion with the dementia services. And in fact, the questions I was going to ask with SSW2 and SSW3, you have clarified for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Hugh David, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give an example that's just occurred to me actually as the director has referenced dementia services, and that's the service that we launched before the pandemic at Bridgend Life Centre, also known as Bridgend Recreation Centre, and that was swimming sessions for people with dementia, but also their carers. And it's a very successful and good example of how there are alternatives to traditional day services where people go to specialist day centres. This is where we're providing activities that are tailored but are in public community facilities, and actually are about supporting the carers as much as around supporting the individual that has the health problem, and we're actually developing far more of those type of initiatives where people can access support and services, but in community settings. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Has anyone else got any anything they wanted to ask on this item? No. Move on to SSW2 then, and that's the remodelling day service provision for older people and learning disability services. Councillor Dendy had another question on this, and it all stemmed around the pandemic has enabled the service to find new ways of working. So it was more of what are these, and how are you going about these new ways of working. Her concern from here came from, for example, there have been people who've been filling in forms over the phone whilst officers are working from home. And she was concerned, she didn't want anyone to fall through the net because some people were struggling with the telephone, and whether there were plans to bring staff back in as well to ensure that there was a balance in what was offered to residents. If we could start with that, please.
Yeah, thanks again for the question. I think I've answered some of that around how things have been accelerated during the pandemic, and this really has been driven by the individuals themselves. I did a call some while ago with people in supported living, and they were really clear that they didn't want to go back to the day service. They were having a great time connecting into their own communities and really enjoying themselves. So that's about that remodelling piece there. We have continued, I think is important to say, we've continued to operate services throughout the pandemic from a day opportunities point of view. At some points in the pandemic, they've been very restricted for people with the very highest levels of needs, where the risk to public health was actually less than the risk to safeguarding and well-being of not continuing to operate a service. And then at other times, with all the usual now, caveats of social distancing as far as is possible, and PPE services have been far more had a feel of business as usual within them. In terms of our staff, from a blended working point of view, most teams across social services have brought forward business cases around blended return to office accommodation, and we operate in integrated teams, don't we, in both adults and children's services, integrated with education and family support in the hubs in children's services, and with health colleagues in adult services, and we do operate in that blended way, which I think will continue to be the way that we will work, because it is the best of both worlds, really, in terms of being efficient and effective and getting pieces of work done when working from home, and working with colleagues where collaboration and that joint working makes a real difference for us, and there's been significant investment in Bridgend, hasn't there, in community hubs for both adults and children teams to work from, and then that piece about forms, at various points in the pandemic in terms of social work practice, and speaking for adults and children's now, risks have been at different levels in terms of our operating models, and I know we've talked about that in scrutiny committees before, but we're now in a position where for quite some time in children's services, a little less time in adult services, we're back to doing social work in people's homes as we always did, unless it's really not in their interest or ours, or something can be done more efficiently in a digital way.
Okay, thanks very much. Has anyone else got any questions on SSW2? No. And then we're on the final one, SSW3, remodelling supported living services. Now, you have gone through this. The only person from our pre-meeting who had a question was Councillor Janice Lewis, but I'm not sure if your question was answered previously. Councillor Lewis?
Oh, sorry about that. I got trying to find everything then. Yeah, it was, thank you. On the remodelling, yes, but it's just the question I did sort of religiously want an answer to was, how often do we take remodelling? Because I seem to see that quite often, especially over the last couple of years. It seems to be yearly. Will it continue like that or not? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lewis. I think social services in Bridgend and across Wales has been remodelling for many years now. Certainly, since the Social Service and Wellbeing Act, but pre that as well. Trying to look at how we practice in that strength-based way, and what that means for the way that we provide services, and we will continue to do that, and be very driven by supporting people to live the lives they want to live. That in business case terms and financial terms, there comes a crux, doesn't there, when we talk about cost effective, it doesn't always mean cheaper. Sometimes it does mean that savings can result, and I think the narrative in the overarching report explains probably the different situation that we find ourselves in, where we are seeing increased needs for services. We're still trying to do that in the least intensive, most cost-effective way, which supports people to do what matters to them. But that need for services is increasing, and that links into the budget pressures that we've talked about, doesn't it? And it's also, we talked about workforce in this meeting, and many others, making sure that we're paying a fair price for care, that workforce terms and conditions, as read the conversations that they've been within this meeting, are at the heart of what we do in terms of social care. It's those three elements that come together, isn't it? It's what matters to people, it's that offer in terms of services, and doing that in a way which supports what matters against increasing need and demand, and a fair price. And all of that comes together in terms of the way that you set the budget for social services and well-being, because those well-being elements are absolutely critical, aren't they, in terms of keeping demand at that level outside of statutory services. So I think you'll continue to see the word remodel. Whether it'll have savings or pressures attached to it in future years. We will continue to do that work, very much informed by the evidence and the data.
Councillor Hugh David, to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's important to stress as well that the needs of the citizen and the user continues to be paramount in that remodelling. Obviously, there's legal obligations on us to do that, and to ensure that those voices are heard and it is at the heart of the decision-making process. In the remodelling around supported living, we commissioned People's First, an organisation that's very experienced and well respected locally. It's a charity. We commissioned them to undertake work with the service users, because obviously they're not always able to express themselves in a way that other people can. So we've ensured that they've had advocacy as part of the process, and I'm sure Claire can confirm that they've been very supportive, and there's been extensive engagement and consultation with those service users. I think Councillor Lewis is right to point out that remodelling now has been at the forefront of social services for a long time in Bridgend, but I wouldn't want people to think that they're in that individual services in a constant state of change. I think that different services have been on different stages of the journey of remodelling. So I've been here long enough now to remember the first major remodelling of the service, and it was very much welcomed, because I can recall when some of the individuals that are now supported in the community were actually living in large residential institutions that were simply not fit for purpose, and they weren't in their own homes, they were in homes, and they had bedrooms, but they didn't have their own kitchens and facilities, and we saw that a transformation of the services, and I don't think anyone has regretted that. They were very pleased to be supported in their local communities in homes that feel and look like homes. This latest remodelling is nowhere near as radical as that, is it, Claire? Because I think the premise of the model is the same, but it's how we configure that and support people better and in different ways. But the fundamental principle and core of the model, that we support people in their local communities, whether that's Pencoed, Bridgend, Maestig, Porthcawl, Pyle, the Garw, the Ogmore, Pencoed, wherever, we are doing that, and we've got really strong support for that from the service users, and we'll be very careful and cautious now in how we transition out where there is going to be some change, because there will be some change, won't there, Claire? But we'll place the individual at the heart of that change process. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Can I just bring in Claire first, because the leaders asked specific questions and included you in those.
Yeah, it's only to reinforce what the leader said, really. I shouldn't have answered that question without making strong reference to advocacy when we talk about what matters to people. That independence of advocacy in driving those remodelling programmes is absolutely critical. You know, this is a good news story. If we look back 20, 30 years, how transformative people's lives have been from large-scale institutions into living in their own homes, and they are very much their own homes, in communities, living the lives they want to live, connected into their own local communities. What we do next will be a an iteration in a sense, but very much driven by individuals. As I said a bit earlier, people are telling us they want to work. We all want to work, don't we? Meaningful occupation is great. How can we remodel further to support people's aspirations and you know, just wanting to live the lives they want to live, and that will continue to be at the heart in these sorts of papers. It's how does that translate then into a budget that we set, and I was just trying to highlight really that you know, listening to people, what do they need and want going forward, how do we form that into services, what do those services cost, and how do we reflect that in our workforce models. That's where it all comes together really in these budget setting proposals.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Gebbie.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I just wanted to reference, you know, I'm old social work, transformation agenda has been around for a number of years, and I think I just wanted to highlight to the committee that just one stat that I can give you off the top of my head is that last year we would have had 5,000 more referrals into our supported. So that gives you an indication of what's working in the community with our third sector. You know, we talked about our community connectors earlier. It's really important that people aren't done to, it's actually what they want. Social work practice used to be, what can we do for you? Whereas now the conversation has changed. What can you do? What can't you do? And what can we help you with? So the conversation in social work has changed significantly in practice under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, under the Social Services Act. So how we deliver services has had to change. So there will be a transformative agenda. So we will be remodelling, but for the benefit of our communities, I think is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Chair.
Great, thanks very much. Has anyone got any more questions on this item or the whole report before I allow all the invitees to leave so that we can discuss any recommendations we've got? Right, Mark Shepherd, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just one brief concluding comment, if I may, Chair, having now obviously attended a few of these meetings this week. CW3 is obviously the allocation on a corporate-wide basis of £1 million to replace the hardship funding that was coming from Welsh Government, and obviously that was alluded to earlier, really, about some of the unknowns. I suppose I just wanted to make the point, to make that real, because it is relevant to Claire's area. There will be a number of things that will potentially emerge during the course of the year that we can't wholly predict at the moment. So what that £1 million does is give us some flexibility. So I suppose it's quite easy to be seduced, isn't it, by the relatively high settlement figure. But then I suppose naturally I'm cautious about some of the additional demands and pressures we're going to face moving forward. So specifically in Claire's area, we know, for example, that we have a contract with Halo, predicated very much on pre-pandemic conditions and usage of leisure centres and swimming pools and a certain amount of income. Now, moving forward, all of the industry evidence tells us that usage of leisure centres has only recovered to perhaps 60, maybe 70% maximum of previous terms. So I imagine, and I'm speculating a little bit, but I imagine moving forward, we're going to arrive at a situation where, you know, there'll be some tough choices for the authority. Do we want to keep all leisure centres open all of the time as now? And if we do we have to pay more? Or alternatively, do we say, well, OK, we're only going to pay you the same, but accept that may require some change to the current contractual conditions? So I suppose I'm just illustrating that, and it is relevant to Claire's area specifically, that there are still lots and lots of challenges that we can't wholly predict at this point, and therefore that council-wide growth budget of £1 million is very much there for that purpose, just recognising that there may be a plethora of things moving forward that we will have to pick up as we go along. I just thought it's worth emphasising that, because it doesn't necessarily come through from the papers, but I'm aware of numerous things that may be hitting us in due course.
Yeah, I think I raised that question in corporate scrutiny as to whether that pot was for all directorates, because obviously it was under your directorate heading, but whether it was for all directorates to be able to use that if needed.
Absolutely. Apologies if that isn't clear. I mean, it sits corporately, so it sits in my directorate. I mean, in fact, it's highly unlikely that the Chief Executive's directorate would get most of it. It's more likely to be service demands where things materialise, which previously might have been paid for as part of the hardship fund. But of course, moving forward, we're being told as per the earlier question, we're being told that we'd have to cover that within the settlement. So I just thought it was worth reiterating that, because I think it's come up, I think I'm right, in every scrutiny meeting. So I'm conscious there's some people aren't on every committee, so just making that point. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks very much. Has anyone got anything they wanted to raise now before we allow all the invitees to leave so we can consider this report and the recommendations? No. Okay, can I thank everyone for their time this morning and for answering all of our questions in such detail. You're free to leave now if you want to, so that we can then move on to whether we've got any recommendations to send through to Cabinet as a result of this report.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, okay, great. Meryl, have you been making notes? Have you picked up on any, if there are any recommendations from this report?
Thank you, Chair. So obviously we've had quite extensive questions from the committee today to the invitees. We've gathered a lot more information, and I suspect some of those answers will have satisfied the committee, and they may not need to make recommendations on those points, but some of the points you will still want to make recommendations on. So I think I've picked up a number of points, but I don't know if you wanted to go through them, if you want to go through the whole list to see if there's any recommendations from members. Okay. Obviously there's the point about the national terms and conditions for the social worker, perhaps a recommendation there.
Yeah.
Perhaps a recommendation with the last point that the Chief Executive made about, I think you raised before, the £1
million pot.
Whether it would be enough, I think, in your words.
Yeah, my concern there is whether it's
efficiency.
Yeah. If we come to Councillor David White first, I think he wants to come in on the living wage issue.
I would like to put this committee really that we do endorse at least a Welsh national wage for social workers. I think it will it won't be the cure, to having like gaps in social workers, but I think it will help a lot. I think when we got local authorities, neighbouring authorities competing against wages, you're talking sometimes, some local authorities are like putting an extra £6,000 or £5,000, as market forces supplements. And I think if we came to a national wage like teachers, police, and nurses, I think it'll be a step forward. I'm not saying it's the ultimate cure, but what I'm saying is it'll be a step forward, and I'd like to think this committee could support that.
Chair, if I could just clarify the different language. The officers mentioned national terms and conditions, as well as the wage.
Yeah. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah. Can I just make a comment? I've had a chance to think that through, because David obviously raised it in our pre-session, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the merit in that, because in a way, I think from what David's saying and how I view it, that really local authorities are similar to subsidiaries of a company, and the main company is, if you like, Welsh Government, and then we have got the 22 local authorities below that. And I think I very much doubt that you would find any company that allowed its divisions, unless they were visibly totally separate, to be paying different rates to different within different parts of that company. So I think there's a lot of merit in pressing forward with that idea.
And likewise, they wouldn't be allowing different departments to poach other members either.
Well, that's right. Yeah. I suppose a small example could be what we know goes on to a certain extent in our schools. And that is, some schools are, there is an incentive, if you like, for heads to progress their schools. They have a degree of autonomy, but very often there's an incentive for heads to try and attract the pupils that are going to perhaps get higher grades than others. It's not a big issue, but I mean that is an example of where sometimes the targets or outcomes that you seek from a particular company or division or department sometimes works against the overall aims of the company.
Yeah, okay, great. So that's our first one then. Everyone's in agreement.
Do you want to go through the table, sort of if there's anything specific that members still feel is outstanding for a recommendation?
Okay, yeah, so if we go through SSW1, and that was increased to connected persons, fostering fees stemming from a national eligibility criteria in Wales. I don't think there were any recommendations from that. There wasn't much, was it? Because I think Councillor White raised about, it's a very difficult one as well with setting budgets when you don't know what's going to be on your doorstep throughout the year and at what stages. SSW2, increased pressure on mental health services due to the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting lockdowns. We were given examples here, and I think the questions were stemming from the staff absences as well as the result of mental health issues and the increased pressure on staff as well. So I don't know if there's any recommendations to go from that. Don't know if anyone's got any suggestions. No. So SSW3, that's the one with the national living wage. We've just agreed that our recommendation to endorse looking at that and the whole package as well that comes with it. SSW4, which is the increase in the older person's population and corresponding increase in pressure on services. I think from here, it ties in with a number of others, is to ensure that these aren't excluded through digital processes. For example, I think we need to make that clear. We want to make sure that the older people aren't being excluded because we're turning digital in a number of areas. And whilst it was throughout the presentation, we were told that there are different ways of dealing with people. I think we need to reiterate that. Don't know if everyone's in agreement with that.
Chair, do you want to also link that one to the work that the leader talked about on the exploration of improving connectivity? You know, that you endorse that maybe as well as that one, yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, because I think he discussed about certain areas, but I'm also finding, I don't know if others are, that it's even new developments close to town are struggling with connectivity. And, you know, when you build in 1,500 houses, sometimes that's not available, and it's not thought of until afterwards. So I think there are people throughout the borough who are struggling with connectivity, no matter where they're placed. So I think, yes, definitely we need to ensure that is progressed. And if anyone has any comments as we're going along, please come in and give them. So SSW5, that's the Children's Services Workforce Pressures. I think this is a key one for the authority because we are struggling to recruit. I think this needs to be at the forefront of any recommendations to ensure that we are doing all that we can to recruit.
Chair, I was just going to, as a point of clarity, the one that we talked about earlier, which was the lobbying for national wages and terms and conditions for social workers, was linked to SSW5, I think, not
right. Okay.
3. I think 3 was the real living wage, which is being implemented pressure.
Yeah.
So,
right.
just a clarification.
Yeah. Great. And I think also, if you're looking at when we were told there's a huge reliance on agency staff at the moment, and because of the demand, the need, the rates have increased, and so we're paying a third more. So I think there is a real need to be less reliant on agency staff, because we're spending a lot more money on these staff. So I think that needs to be also looked at, what we can do potentially to reduce the requirement. And I know they said it's difficult because you cannot have vacancies in this area, which I totally agree with. We need to make sure we're doing all that we can to reduce the reliance on agency staff, because obviously that will bring costs down then.
Would that be one for those two combined, or two separate ones?
In what respect now? One for the looking at
for the national wage and terms and conditions for social workers, and the need to be less reliant on agency staff combined, or two separate points? Sorry.
I would say I would put the need to be less reliant on agency as a separate one, to ensure that we're looking constantly as well at our recruitment drive and what we're doing. What can we do to enhance that, to improve it? Because you know, we've been told time and time again that this is what we're offering, but we're still not bringing people in. We've still got a large vacancy rate. And I know it's the same across all local authorities throughout the whole of the UK, but we need to also be doing, at the moment, until we've got these national pay awards in place, we've got to do something to keep thinking outside the box. So it's to continue, and it's very difficult because I don't think any of us can come up with the answers, but it's to continue looking at that pressure.
To me, you know, it's not just about wages, it's about, you know, the job itself. You know, it's about making sure there's like low caseloads. It's about making sure, you know, the pressures aren't there for the workers. Yeah. You know, it's like I say, it's not just down to wages. You've got to make sure that that we're able to do the job, not just properly but safely.
Yeah.
With your permission, at the end of the meeting, I will pull these together and email them round to everybody present, and ask that any comments you come back to us quickly so that we can firm up the recommendations then.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So should we move on then to SSW6, and that's the increase in take-up of direct payments within children's services. I don't think there were any recommendations from that. We did ask about adult services, but again, I think they explained that there would be less of a budget issue with adult services.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So then SSW7, increasing cost of supported living service following re-tender. I didn't pick up anything in that. I don't know if you did.
Not on that one, Chair.
No.
I'm taking it as we go through these that there's a consensus, or otherwise members would speak up if they didn't agree, because obviously the recommendations are the committee's recommendations, not individuals.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. It's a bit quiet, but hopefully everyone's happy then. So then if we move on to the Appendix B, budget reduction proposals, SSW1, so that was support people to live their lives. Again, this is where we said about technology, and it was explained that they weren't referring specifically to making everything, you know, paperless. It was more of the telecare system. But I think we do need to also make sure that that point is there, that whilst we've got to find the extra 200,000, we need to make sure that we're not digitally excluding individuals, and that is included. But we have got that as a recommendation throughout the report, haven't we?
I'll make sure we've got that, Chair, yes.
Has anyone got anything else then? No. SSW2, recent experience of the pandemic has enabled the service to find new ways of working. And again, that is, I think it was explained, a lot of people are happier with the way it's working, and they're looking at the blended working again, but to also not exclude people who can't fill in forms. We discussed it over the telephone and that, and to make sure that there is the option for face-to-face going forward for those who feel more comfortable with that. So you got that?
Yeah,
I don't think there was anything else from there. And then the remodelling, we were told that the services will continue to be remodelled as and when it's needed, but it'll be smaller parts of the service rather than the whole service just constantly being remodelled. So I don't know if there was any anyone had any recommendations from that. I don't think there were. Is that everything you picked up, Meryl?
It was just the last point the Chief made about the council-wide £1 million.
Right, yeah, that was it. Yeah, I'm concerned that
the sufficiency that you've really raised.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lewis, first of all, did you want to come in because you were keen to discuss the remodel?
Yeah, sorry about that. By the time I try to find everything, what it is, it's just that it's a constant sort of, when you see the remodeling, you always think that what they've got is not the right one.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps they should put in that we are remodeling what is already a good model that they have now. You know, it's just improvement on. Because it seems to me the remodeling is that what I've got is not good enough. But if they say they're good enough, but they're striving to improve on it, then perhaps that might be a bit better.
So it's more of a continuous improvement rather than a...
I think the term remodelling suggests you're changing everything rather than tailoring it to current needs. Like services have had to be tailored due to COVID. Doesn't mean they're all being remodelled, because remodelling you automatically think is a large administration cost to remodelling something as well.
Yeah, yes, totally. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor White. Councillor White, did you have something to add?
Yeah, with remodelling, it can cause anxiety amongst staff and also service users as well, because it causes insecurities. And sometimes, like you said, you know, yes, we're all going to strive for better, you know, improve the service. I'm not against that. But sometimes, you know, when you are going to remodel a service, you've got to appreciate if you do it too often and too much, it can impact on the welfare of staff and the service users. And sometimes it's best to say, let's let it go for a few years and see how we do it. Because something like you said, it is always, once you put it in place, well, let's now remodel it again. It's like painting the Forth Road Bridge. Sometimes when you paint it one end, you get the other end, you're back to doing it again. But to me, you know, it's about, you know, just be wary of the impact this has on staff and also on service users as well.
Great, okay, thanks. What we're looking at there as well, like we were saying, is it's sometimes as well the terminology of remodelling. You wonder, does that mean staff changes, staff losses, staff movement? Remodelling is one word to explain everything, whereas sometimes if it could be like it's just tailored, the service is tailored to meet the ongoing needs or something like that, but not because of remodelling. Does you think the whole administration is going to be changed? You're going to have mass change with the terminology remodelling?
Yes, Chair, and I don't think it explained the you know, the extensive consultation and advocacy that are taking place, so that in some respects it was what service users preferred, isn't it? So it may be perceived as a negative connotation when a bit more information would have provided assurance.
And from the public perspective, members of the public must be thinking, how much money is this costing to remodel services constantly? Because the thought of when you remodel, you quite often there's a lot of change in remodeling, which comes with its financial cost. And like you say, if there's consultation, and then any changes that are made, any paperwork changes or anything has got a cost linked to it as well. So what, you know, are we throwing money away on remodelling?
Well, I'll draft that up and circulate it to you, Chair.
Yeah, good luck for that one.
Sorry,
So it was finally then the pot. I raised this at corporate scrutiny because I'd raised it from a point of view of education as well, knowing that there's been a reliance from that directorate too on the hardship fund. And I believe both directorates, I think since April up until now, when we're to the end of the third quarter, I think it's about £800,000 each reliance on. I think overall we were told today a figure of 3 million from the hardship fund, wasn't it, in total since the start of it? But if two directorates,
that was over a year and almost another year, wasn't it?
Yeah, but if two directorates so far this year have got £800,000 each, and that's just two of the directorates, I don't think £1 million is going to be enough, and I'm concerned that there will be a reduction in services within directorates if they're forced to fund these costs themselves. So I don't know what everyone else agrees. I think potentially could we have a recommendation to revisit that figure of £1 million to see if it is enough? Is everyone happy with that?
Is there any dissent or is that consensus?
There's nobody's hands up. Nobody seems to be wishing to speak. Okay then, so if that's the case, you're happy to write it all up and then send it out to us and double check that we're all happy with it all?
Yes, Chair.
With the recommendations?
I will email the members present today, and if you can look out for the email to come back to us with any comments, and the final recommendations will go to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 1st of February for amalgamation with the other committees and sending on to Cabinet on the 8th of February. That will be the process then, Chair. And lastly, we've got urgent items.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, so the last agenda item is agenda item number 5, so that's urgent items, and there are no urgent items. So we can now close this meeting.